In previous videos, we've talked about the three criteria in terms of change. The first one is you become aware that you want to have a change, and that means you're conscious, right? You really want to make a change, and for some people that's enough. Oh, I know what I want, and then they just do it. They're the kind of people who figured, oh, I've gained too much weight, now I want to lose weight, and then they just do it. Most people aren't there. We have to go through the second phase from being conscious to actually training the brain and the nervous system. In other words, some sort of learning paradigm so that you can actually follow through on what it is you want to do. A lot of times we might have like what's called beginner's luck. For some reason, we can always bowl the first strike, or we can always maybe lose weight easily the first time, or it's really much easier than you thought to quit nicotine or some other substance. And we have beginner's luck, and then we think, oh, this is easy, and then suddenly we fall back into the old negative patterns. However, if being aware of what you want, and then you train yourself to get it, and an example of training, just so we're clear about that, is like when you learn the times tables, you repeated it again and again and again, or if you learned a new language, you repeated the main words and the grammar until you remembered it, and then you started using it and it got integrated in if you're fluent in the language or if you can do the times tables fluently. So we know that awareness and training are extremely important if you're going to master something. But sometimes, even if you're aware and you've been training, you still can't do it. And maybe one of the main reasons why you can't follow through is you might have some sort of limiting belief, some sort of trauma in your past experience, something that's preventing you from being able to initialize the learning that you've gone through, that learning paradigm. That's where deeper change really comes in, where we're trying to figure out what happens at a deeper level that's preventing us from moving forward. I want to share with you my experience with anxiety, because I'm a person who had extreme anxiety. It was so bad that I was actually laying on the kitchen floor and my whole body was just shaking uncontrollably. And that's a panic attack, right? It's so painful. And for someone who's never had anxiety before, it's hard to conceptualize because you're not getting hit anywhere, you're not getting stabbed, but it's probably one of the most painful experiences you can have. I'm not sure whether I can say this on YouTube, but I'll try. It's like a negative orgasm. Your whole body is just having these waves of pain, except it doesn't reach a crescendo and then you're done. It actually continues and can come back again and haunt you. And a lot of people develop anxiety for anxiety. They fear that pain so much. So it's actually not fear of anxiety, it's fear of the pain that the anxiety causes that they're afraid of. And so they develop lots of avoidance types of behavior in order to not have to experience that extreme physical pain. And the pain is psychosomatic. That means there's no physical reason why you're feeling pain. It's being created by how you're perceiving the world around you for a lot of people. For some people, it's also psychosomatic in the sense that there's no physical pain, but there might be some deeper neurological issues involved, and I'll get back to that. But first, my story very briefly. When I was 40-something, my wife that I had been married to for over 20 years, she decided she wanted to solve her midlife crisis without me. And of course, this was devastating. I could go into a lot of detail about what happened, but I'll just cut out all that stuff and just say it was one of the most painful experiences and very devastating experiences I've ever had. And to be honest, I was not suicidal, but if a brick had hit me in the head and put me out of my misery, I would probably have felt very grateful at the time. I mean, I can remember walking through the streets of Oslo just completely devastated. It was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. The thing is, though, I don't have anxiety today, and I haven't had it for maybe the last, well, let's say, I used about a year and a half to get out of it. So maybe the last 19 or maybe even 20 years of my life, I haven't had anxiety. I'm 63 now. I mean, nada, no anxiety whatsoever. A lot of people don't seem to ever be able to get completely out of their anxiety. I think one of the reasons why I was able to get out of the anxiety is that before I had anxiety, I had been a meditator. I had been meditating for several years. So I had very good control over this ability to do introspection, to go in and feel myself and understand what's going on inside of me. I had also worked extensively with hypnosis, and I worked with other people with anxiety. So I knew immediately what it was. I didn't think I was going to get a heart attack. I didn't think I was dying. So there's no fear of death. It was just so painful. The whole thing, though, is that when you're completely consumed by this pain, you can't think clearly. And I remember just laying there on the floor, just shaking and just thinking, this is just terrible. So the question is then, what did I do? How did I get out of the anxiety? I started following what I'd been teaching other people, and that was I was paying attention to my thoughts, because I know that thoughts will trigger negative emotions. But before I did that, at first I tried to jump up and down and move around, and that didn't work so well. I had gone through this NLP training before all this happened, and I really believed in this idea of state control. And state control does work, but it really didn't work for me when I was extremely consumed by anxiety. So, okay, let's go back and define what state control is. So state control means that I can decide how I want to feel at any moment, at any given moment in time. That is only true if I'm not having anxiety, or if I'm not consumed by extreme pain or some sort of traumatic event. So for people who don't have a lot of trauma in their past, or have somehow worked through it, yes, state control is a fantastic tool. So before I get in front of the camera, I jump around, I slap myself on the face, I get myself going, and that allows me to stay completely focused and on track. It doesn't work, though, at least for me, when I was extremely anxious. And a lot of people use pills, medication, illegal substances in order to get state control. And that's not such a good way to do it, because you start believing it's the pill that is helping you, when it's actually your ability to shift your consciousness and start thinking and acting in a different way. Anyway, back to the whole thing, though. I realized that state control wasn't working so well, and I just couldn't do it. So then I thought, okay, well, I got to focus on my thinking. And I kept having these intrusive thoughts, and it was about my ex and all the disappointment and all the things that I felt. I felt so betrayed. And I was thinking, how could she do this to me? Just listen to that sentence. How could she do this to me? And why did she do this to me? I mean, you couldn't get more clear language about being in a victim role. I thought my life was over. I thought my future was completely ruined. And I thought, how could someone I had trusted so much and loved so much, how could she do this? And why did she do this? And suddenly it occurred to me that I was so stuck in these thoughts, and they were triggering so much anxiety, but still trying to counteract those thoughts again. It felt like you're lighting a match in a hurricane, right? You're just not able to get it to light. There was no way I could get my thoughts and my feelings under control by changing my thinking. What I did eventually is that I started focusing on my past, because I thought, why should I be so devastated by this when I know that I have a good education, I know I'll find love again in the future. It's really not a problem. Of course it hurts, but I shouldn't be suffering from extreme anxiety from this. So then I thought, well, there's got to be something in my past. And I asked myself, and it's just a really interesting story because I was sitting in the parking lot where my previous place of work, and as I was sitting there, I was having a panic attack. I was just shaking and extremely painful. And I asked my unconscious mind, what do I need to do to be able to mitigate the pain, to just reduce it? That's all I was thinking. And suddenly it was like this voice came from above and said, Sigurd, you need to be held by a big, strong guy. Well, that was strange because I'd never thought of that before. It was not a conscious thought. It was just an intuitive understanding of something. So I trusted that feeling of I needed some guy to hold me. And I had a friend of mine who, and he's still a good friend of mine, who works as a Gestalt therapist. And I'm 173 and he's like 2 meters tall. And so he said, okay, Sigurd, I can do that for you. And so what I did was I just let him hold me in his arms and I just let out all the emotion. And that was a very catharsis moment for me. That actually reduced my pain by about 60%. And then the ability to do state control and to change my thoughts, I was able to do that after I had reduced the pain tremendously. Now, why did that work? It worked because my father was a merchant marine and he was never home. So I never had that male role model of someone I could depend upon. The male role model who is the archetype of the hunter and the warrior who protects the family and brings home the food. Yes, he sent money home and he did the best he could. However, he was not there physically when I needed him. He wasn't there when I wanted to go to the Boy Scouts with my father and all that stuff that a young boy wants to experience with their father, at least when you're growing up in the U.S. And that energy was missing from my life. And when that energy came into my life, that helped me tremendously. And it helped me become more secure as a man and more secure as a person in terms of being a good therapist, because now I knew from experience how important that male energy is in helping people become secure. I don't go around hugging my clients or doing that kind of therapy. It just doesn't seem appropriate, and it doesn't work very well the few times where I've actually tested it out. I think it has to be something that comes from within the person, and they have to be asking for that in order for that to really work. Anyway, that was part of the journey. But I still have about 40% left of the pain and the anxiety. And again, I thought, well, this is silly. Why am I having this feeling of abandonment and my life is over? And another flash came into my mind, and it just flashed like this. And this is very typical when you're recovering a trauma, because the part of your brain that's remembering the trauma doesn't remember the whole story. It only remembers parts of the story that's going to act as a warning. And all I can remember is I'm looking through like these little bars, and there's this light bulb, bare light bulb in the ceiling. And it's dark outside, and I'm all alone. And I remember my mom telling me that when I was little, I was admitted to the hospital for a double hernia operation. And you have to remember, this is around 63, 64, so I'm like 2 or 3 years old. And at that time, they honestly believed that children should not be with their parents when they're being operated on. So I was put in a bed in a hospital room all alone, and the only thing I can remember from it is looking through those little, like a jail thing, and looking at that light bulb and feeling extremely lost, scared, and all alone, abandoned, in other words. And when I could reconnect that feeling of abandonment and understand that within this new narrative, it suddenly helped me connect the dots and allowed me to be able to just continue to push through the pain, and that also helped mitigate the pain. And now suddenly my pain is down to about 20% or 30%. So it reduced it another 10% or so. The thing that I had to really work on at the very end of my journey of getting the anxiety completely out of my body was I kept torturing myself with these intrusive thoughts. Why did she do this to me? How could she do this to me? Why did she do this to me? How could she do it? Just repeat it again and again and again. And those intrusive thoughts were very, very painful. And the only way I could get them out of my mind was to challenge them, as is in the textbooks, right? So I would challenge them. I would say something like, well, she doesn't really understand her own motives anyway, so you're never going to get an answer that you're satisfied with. You're never going to get that in-depth understanding of her own position and why things didn't work out. And what happened then is, as I was standing in this and feeling this pain and this extreme abandonment issues that was being triggered by these negative thoughts, why did she do this? I just had to be very strict with myself and not let those thoughts dominate. What I did was I stopped them by saying, she can't answer, and I will never get an answer that will satisfy me. She can't answer, and she will never be able to give me an answer. And I repeated that process again and again and again. And I actually used about 18 months, a year and a half, to be able to get rid of those thoughts completely. They were very intrusive. And at first, they would bother me the whole day. And then they would bother me 3/4 of the day, and then half a day, and then a quarter of the day, and then only for like maybe an hour or two in the morning. And then finally they stopped completely. You see the whole thing here? So this is how I got rid of my anxieties. I first went through the body, the soma, identifying where in the body it felt very painful. And I said, what do I need? And my unconscious mind told me I needed to be hugged. And then the next part of my journey was to explore this irrational abandonment issues, believing I could never be loved again. And that's when the whole idea of looking through the cage and feeling like in jail came up. And then I reintegrated that with the narrative about being in the hospital. And then the next part of my journey was to stop the intrusive thoughts. I think a lot of times when cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy goes wrong is because the trauma can be sitting in the body. And if you don't have a way of working that out of the body, it's just going to keep triggering and coming back again and again and again, because it's at a deeper level. So I worked through these 3 different levels within myself, not really having a very good meta perspective on it, but I did work through it. And eventually, it took me about a year and a half, I got rid of my anxiety completely. I think I'm pretty inoculated against anxiety now. One of the advantages I had, as I said to begin with, is because I had been meditating for many years. And at the same time, I had also worked as a psychologist. So I immediately knew what was happening to me, and I immediately knew that I had the resilience in my mind, in my brain, to be able to push back. One of the things I advocate for people, if you just want to have good mental health and be a high achiever, is to be able to learn how to meditate. I think I'll create a little video on that, on mindfulness meditation. Another thing that I think really helped me was the fact that I had a lot of intuitive understanding based on my work with hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I honestly believe that there are parts of ourselves that operate outside of consciousness, and we have actually good research that shows that that is true. And a lot of times change, if we're thinking about, if we go back to the whole idea of consciousness or awareness, and then training or some sort of learning paradigm, and then maybe working through some sort of trauma. The whole thing, though, is that if you're on the learning paradigm, you need to understand how learning works and what it's going to do for you and how it's going to help you push forward. So the idea that I could meditate, that I understood this paradigm here, at least at the unconscious level, now I have a meta perspective on it, so I'm able to guide other people through it. And another thing that I've incorporated in my life is because I've started being much more aware of the narrative, how exactly you're retelling the story to yourself. I tell people that trauma is two things. It's partially what the body is remembering of what happened, but it's also all about how you're retelling the story to yourself. And the retelling of the story reinforces the trauma patterns in your body. And when you start retelling the story from a different perspective, a perspective of control, a perspective of meaning, and having a narrative that flows from the beginning, middle, and towards the end, showing that you have good introspective understanding and perspectives on what has happened, this really can allow you to reorganize the physical body. So whether everyone needs to have a hug or needs some sort of physical training, I'm not sure. Some people even think that you have to go deeper, and this is maybe one of the reasons why that was necessary for me, and that is actually to learn how to regulate your emotions better. And that's a whole nother topic for another video, this self-regulation. So there might actually be something in between where you have awareness, you have some sort of learning paradigm, but at the same time you want to evaluate how good am I at regulating my emotions. And then, of course, the degree of how good you're at regulating your emotions will most likely be connected to a trauma. And a trauma can also be something you didn't get as a child, as well as something that you were abused about, whether it be verbally, physically, or sexually. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of this video. Are there any questions? I really love that interaction with a live audience where I can ask questions. Anyway, if you found this interesting and you're someone who wants to be a high achiever and you feel stuck in any way, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, send me a comment, and my offer still is good. I want to help someone free of charge, and the way they can pay me back is that we can record it on Zoom and put it up on the channel to show how I'm working and how you too can resolve any of your issues, no matter which level they might be on, in terms of being able to move forward and create the life that you really want, fulfill your dreams, and be the best version of yourself. Remember, this channel is all about you.